The COVID-19 outbreak has made us think a lot more about what we eat. Could the virus have actually come from a wet market in Wuhan, from the eating of wild animal meat? Well, not much is known at the moment, and a lot more research needs to be done. But the truth of the matter is zoonotic diseases, in other words, where viruses, bacteria, and even parasites hop from animals to humans, well, that's been around for quite a while. Ebola is one, swine flu and bird flu are others. So could we actually have meat that is clean, where an animal isn't slaughtered, but instead where the meat is grown in a laboratory? Science fiction? Perhaps not. Dr. Sandhya, Sriram, welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm very excited to be here.
Okay, so is it really clean meat, the cell-based meat? How do you know it's clean?
So with cell-based meats, we know the exact origin. We know where it is from, which animal the cells have been taken from. We know what we feed the cells. We're transparent about that. And at the end of the day, we use no antibiotics. There's no hormones. There's no steroids. There's no microplastics or heavy metals in terms of seafood, which is there in the ocean. So at the end of the day, it is clean, not just by saying that it's clean. We actually do tests to make sure that it doesn't have any of the residue components that is there at the end of the day.
In the case of Shiok meats, you're doing shrimps. Yes. So how do you know that the shrimp isn't tainted with anything else? As you say, the oceans are not exactly that clean anymore.
So the first thing is the source of the animal from where we get our stem cells is one of the cleanest sources. There are some clean shrimp farms in the world, existing even today. So we tend to choose those shrimp farms, and we take those shrimps that are not treated with antibiotics, not treated with bleach, don't have heavy metals or mercury poisoning in them. So even the source of our initial stem cells, we make sure it's from a clean animal. And then over the generations of us keeping on growing those stem cells, they actually get rid of all the residue, even if it's there. Let's say it's in a minuscule amount there, it will actually get rid of it. So the meat that we will serve to the people at the end of the day won't be from the first source of the stem cell itself. It'll go through a few rounds of growing and proliferating in the sense growing in numbers and getting to a point where it can actually make shrimp meat. And at the same time, once our final product is ready, we actually run it through third-party organizations that do accredited testings for us to find out how much mercury is there, or how much heavy metal is there, or how much of antibiotic is probably there, even though we don't use them.
Let me take you to the current situation that we're in with COVID-19, the current coronavirus. It's been speculated, although it's actually not shown in any way as yet, that it originated from a wet market in Wuhan. And now we don't know whether that was because of people associating with the animals, merely in others being in contact with the animals, or whether the wild animal meat was consumed. Yes. Now, if we're looking at it from your perspective as a scientist who does cell-based meats, yes, it would be impossible, right, for that to happen then if we were consuming cell-based meats.
That's exactly right. So I wouldn't take the example of COVID-19 because we don't know the source yet. It's only speculation. But you can look at any other viral disease that's come out. Let's take H1N1 or the other ones, swine flu and bird flu. All of them have originated from animals, and it was from the meat itself. As you can imagine, most of the meat that we eat nowadays, or even the seafood that we eat nowadays, are factory farmed. In that sense, they're in super crowded conditions. There's animal feces all over the place. They're not fed the right, the food that they're supposed to be eating. So that actually enhances the growth of viruses or bacteria or parasites. And that basically stays in their tissue or the blood or whatever, we are consuming from them. These viruses might not affect the animal itself, but they use it as a host. And then when we consume that meat, it affects us because they are meant to be human viruses in that sense. So taking those examples, I would say that yes, with cell-based meats, it's grown in a super clean environment that's automated and controlled and extremely sterile to that sense that there's not even the basic bacteria that needs to be there. So coming back to that, there is one question being raised currently is that normal meat and seafood have a healthy probiotic and healthy bacteria that they have in them. But cell-based meats don't have that. So is that going to affect nutrition?
So we wouldn't be getting the normal good bacteria that we would want in our gut when you grow it in a lab.
Yes. So that's where we're seeing.
So you'd add it in?
Yes, you can add it in. For example, there are processed foods in the market nowadays that are made in an extremely clean environment. Take it from yogurt to chocolate to what, like a healthy drink or something. And they say added probiotics on it.
When you actually make these shrimp meats, and I've seen you've cooked it into dumplings, siu mai, all of these things. Does it really smell and taste like meat? Could you tell the difference if you did a blind test?
Okay, I will tell you this. So the first time we did our prototype cooking, it was with a chef in a culinary school, and very interestingly, we have never smelled our meats before. So see, all the work that we do is done in a very clean environment that's like a safety, cabinet kind of a thing. So we can't smell it, we can't, feel it. So we had collected all of the meat and we had taken it in a container to the chef. And that was the first time we had opened it in front of the chef. And my co-founder and I were like, wow, it smells like the ocean. Like that's the first whiff that we got. And we were so pleasantly surprised. And the chef, for example, we had told her that it's a novel food. We didn't actually tell her initially that it was cell-based. We told her it's a novel food.
Oh, so the chef didn't know that this meat was not from so to say, a shrimp.
That's right. We told her it's a biotech-related, meat of sorts, but she kind of didn't want to know more. She was like, no, let me cook it with it first and let's do it. So we did a blind taste test at that cook, and she couldn't tell the difference. Don't take my word for it because I've never eaten shrimps in my life before as a vegetarian. But my co-founder and my chef tasted it and they couldn't tell the difference. And I was the only one who knew which was what because I had unmarked and kept it that way. Because I'd swapped places and stuff like that and then told them to go out of the room and then change and all of that. And they couldn't tell the difference. So it does smell, taste, and the flavor is inherent. Right now, we don't have a structured shrimp. It's minced, so hence a dumpling. But we're working towards a shrimp that will actually look like the real thing.
Cost, though.
Yes.
One of the really tricky things is that just a few dumplings now cost several thousand Singapore dollars to produce. Why is it so expensive?
Sure. So the good thing is in the last, so that was a couple of $1,000s was last year. So we have actually come down to a couple of thousand for a kilogram of shrimp meat right now. So we have reduced the prices substantially. By the end of 2020, start of 2021 is when we'll be actually at a 2 to 3 digit number for a kilogram of the meat. And I'll explain why. So let me just explain the technology very simply, then it's easier to kind of get it. So what we essentially do is we take out the stem cells from a live animal, and once you take it out, you don't have to go back to the animal ever again, because these stem cells can keep growing over and over again.
A stem cell basically is a cell that isn't designated.
I would say it's like a birth cell that doesn't have any fate. But when the body requires, it can either form muscle, it can form eye tissue, it can form liver, it can form anything. So it's kind of like this miracle cell of sorts that can form everything in your body, but it needs the right trigger to make that happen. So we take out the stem cells and we essentially feed them with a liquid nutrient mix. It's a mix of proteins, carbohydrates, fats, very similar to what the animal would eat itself. But because the cells don't have a digestive system, you have to give them a very simple ingredient mix. Right now, that ingredient, I call it soup, nutrient soup, is only made by pharmaceutical companies. It's not made by anyone else in larger quantities for us to purchase, hence the cost. So 90% of our multi-$1,000 kilogram per shrimp is actually the price of that nutrient solution and nothing else.
But couldn't you then make the nutrient solution?
Sure. So now the only problem is, since only a couple of pharma companies make this, and they have, I would say, monopoly to an extent, they don't tell us what's inside it. It's all proprietary, right? So it's called Mix A, that's it. But to an extent, we as scientists definitely know what's inside of it. That's how we've brought it down to, from $5,000 for 8 sumais to $5,000 for a kilogram in the last 1 year. So what we have done essentially is swap out some of the pharmaceutical grade ingredients with plant-based and edible ingredients. So that has substantially brought our costs down. We haven't found an exact alternative for the rest. So now we have to start working on those. And these ingredients are something called growth factors that are very, very important for the cell to grow. These essentially are produced by the animal themselves or chemically by the pharmaceutical companies. You can't get it from plants. It's kind of impossible to get an animal growth factor from plants, right? The cell doesn't have a digestive system. It can't break down let's say in the ocean, shrimp eats algae. Can I just make a soup of algae and feed the cells? No, they would die because they don't have a digestive system.
They can't break it down.
Yes, so you have to break it down to an extent what it would be after the animal would have eaten it, after it digested it, and after it goes into the bloodstream. All of this biology is not well established for seafood especially, and definitely not for shrimp, crab, and lobster. So a lot of the research is actually being conducted within our organization itself. So we are getting there. It's just taking us a little bit of time. It's only been 18 months since we started, but we are quite positive that we will launch commercially next year in Singapore. So we're aiming towards that.
So commercially, you'll be able to buy this. When you say commercially, though, does this mean that I'll be able to go into a supermarket and buy this?
Not supermarket. So we are doing B2B. So we'll sell it to restaurants or food suppliers. So you can walk into a restaurant that we are partnering with to basically go buy a shrimp siumai dish or a shrimp fried rice or a shrimp soup dish.
Nobody's eaten this kind of food, and I expect not even yourself, for many years.
Yeah.
So how are we going to know that eating cell-based meats is going to be okay for us to do, not just for a little while, but let's say for decades, if it really becomes an integral part of what we eat in our diet and what we eat in a cafe?
Yeah. So that's why the food regulatory authorities who are in charge of kind of reviewing and approving these kind of foods have slotted it under novel foods. So novel foods means it's a new type of food that has never been tested either on animals or humans. We don't know what's the outcome, but that doesn't mean it's dangerous. So for example, I can't give you like names of the foods, but there have been many novel foods introduced into even the Singaporean market, and people have been eating it for a couple of years. Till now, there is no connection between any disease or any metabolic errors that are happening because of that food. But to be on the fair side, the food regulatory authorities have to put it under novel foods because honestly, this hasn't been tried before. So we are happy being slotted under novel foods actually because it does give us an outlet to at least start commercialization.
cell-based meats are actually meats. They come from an animal. Whereas now what we're seeing is a lot of impossible meats, all of these types of burgers, they are plant-based, but trying to be meat or giving you the flavor of meat. They're your direct competitors, aren't they?
To an extent, yes. But honestly, for us, in the next 20 to 25 years, the world's population is going to be 10 billion. I don't think we have enough food to feed all of us. We don't even have enough food to feed the 7 billion that we are currently. So to feed 10 billion, you need different sources of food. So we call this industry as alternative protein or alternative food industry because it's different sources. So I believe that a mix of plant-based, cell-based, and insect-based protein is going to be the future. It's already started off. I think insect-based is moving fast ahead. Plant-based is already there. Honestly, we have been eating mock meat in Asia for ages, right?
What about consumers, though, who don't know much about science, who will then say to you, isn't this slightly like a Frankenstein meat?
Most of your packaged food that you get in a supermarket now is all at one point of time in their lifetime, it has been made in a lab. Eventually, then it goes out of the lab and goes into a manufacturing facility, which is food safe and a food manufacturing facility. That's exactly what we're doing with cell-based meats.
You are a vegetarian.
Yes.
Would you eat your own shrimp meat?
I have. I didn't feel guilty. I've been a vegetarian for 35 years of my life. So you can imagine that it'll take me a while to get used to the taste. But I know that I can eat it without any guilt. I know it's clean. I know where exactly it comes from. And I know that we have made it, so why not?
If, let's say, what you're doing now could really begin to replace how we eat meat, and that we don't have to slaughter so many animals, and we don't have to have these chicken farms, and we don't have to have large cattle farms any longer, isn't that going to mean a massive change to farming?
Yes, and honestly, for companies like us, we predict that would happen in the next 10 to 20 years. So we're giving ourselves enough time to make that happen. But there are different ways of doing this. One is where I can say, Shiok Meats will be the only company growing cell-based shrimp, crab, and lobster, and I will be expanding all over the world. Honestly, I don't think that's going to work. So what we want to do, and we have been saying this from day one, is we want to actually partner up with other companies. And interestingly, in Asia, a lot of the big shrimp producers have reached out to us to ask how they can work with us.
Oh, so it's the guys who are actually even farming shrimp who want to know how you're doing
this. For us in Asia, the largest shrimp producers are actually looking at us and asking, how can we partner with you? How can we take this commercially, at a larger scale? Because they have the distribution channels, they know their customers, they know how to sell shrimp. What we know is to make it better. So that's how we want to expand faster. So even if we do that, it's still going to take us a minimum of 10 years to reach that mass scale production that we would like to see, where we can actually say that, 500 shrimp farms have shut down and all of them are making shrimps using stem cells.
But you're saying, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that, 500 shrimp farms and then therefore thousands of shrimp farmers are out of jobs.
No. So from day one, we are very, very sure of this. What we want to do is not get anyone out of their business or not spoil anybody's livelihood. What we want to make them understand is they can make shrimp a different way. They have the land, they know how to sell it, they know how to market shrimp, and they have the customers. So the idea is if we can enable them with our technology, why can't they make shrimp the way we do and then sell eventually shrimp only and nothing else? But it's a cleaner, sustainable, and a better form of shrimp that they can sell. So honestly, we have already started speaking to a couple of shrimp, even small level shrimp farmers, and trying to educate them. I mean, this is such a new technology, and it's not easy to make them understand. But we are trying our level best to go out there and speak to them and let them know, you know what, keep doing what you're doing. Try to do it in a cleaner way, of course. But keep in touch with us when we are ready, and what we can do is enable you with the technology. We'll even help you set up the manufacturing facility, and then you can grow shrimp the way we do.
What about people who say that once you start to commercialize it and it starts to become a factory, it's really just moving it to another form of factory?
Right. So I'm not saying in our case there's no water going to be used or there's no energy going to be used, never. But there's been studies being done showing that definitely the difference is 4 to 10 times, depending on the land use, the water use, the energy resources. So we are reducing for sure. But to what extent, we would know when we set up our manufacturing facility specifically for shrimp. But even while we start setting up our manufacturing facility, which we are doing this year, we are thinking in terms of, can we use solar instead of other forms of energy? How can we keep the environment in such a way that we don't have to use as much water? What are we going to do with the waste material that's out after the processing?
Oh, so there is waste material?
Yes. So, like I mentioned, meat is grown in this liquid, like I mentioned, the soup. At the end of the day, you take it out after the whole process is over in about 6 weeks.
And you have the leftover soup.
You have the leftover soup. What is very interesting for us is the leftover soup actually can be a product because it's soup. And it has flavor. It's packed with flavor and taste and nutrition. So we are looking at a second product for us in terms of that. So actually, we are looking towards a zero waste kind of, zero in that sense will be lesser waste kind of a process. So this nutrient soup can be filtered, taking out whatever the cells have secreted, which is probably not what you want to eat. And then what you get out is a healthy shrimp soup that you can actually drink, or you can convert it into a powder to make it a flavoring agent and so on.
Could you grow your meat in your own home?
Ultimately, yes. That's our vision. So our vision is you can have a small, we call it a bioreactor, but it's a fancy name for a pressure cooker, honestly. It's just a scientific name. It's basically a chamber or a small vessel sort of thing, like your bread maker or something like that, that can maintain temperature and right conditions for your cells and your nutrient solution. And at the end of a couple of weeks, you can grow your own meat for your own family. It's much like making beer or wine at home, or even baking a piece of bread. And one thing to say is this has already been happening. So people have been doing this under a project called Shojin Meat Project in Japan. There are a bunch of very young scientists, I would say biohackers, you would have heard of that term. They're actually growing meat in their home using this kind of technology.
Do you think this is truly going to revolutionize how we're going to eat? And what kind of time frame are we talking about?
I think it's already revolutionizing. You sitting here and interviewing me, people talking about cell-based meat so actively is very, very important, because for us as a cell-based meat company, consumer education is more important than getting the product to market so fast. Because we have to educate the consumers as to why they have to choose this product. So honestly, cell-based meats, when it first came out, it was thought to be a space food in the sense that it could be done in a spacecraft and so on. But eventually we realized that we could do it on Earth for human beings. So we kind of expanded from there. So it's not so sci-fi anymore. But for this to happen, give us a couple of years. It's not like it's going to happen next year. We'll launch next year in restaurants, but I would give it at least another 10 years for people to have this kind of setup in their house for them to make meats.
A very interesting thought. Sandhya, thank you very much for being on In Conversation.
Thank you very much. Yeah.